All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, wherever you're coming from this evening. For us on the Eastern Coast, that is. My name is Taylor Cello. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the president of the Graduate Student Educational Research Association, as we fondly know it to be, just Sarah. And we are so excited tonight to have two expertise here for talking about how we can see the story and ultimately talking about data visualization for practitioner scholars like us, especially as we, enter cycle one and cycle two of our action research. How can we really make that data tell that story? And not only are we going to be focusing on the qualitative side of that, but we're also very lucky to have a presenter tonight, which I'll introduce in a moment, to talk about the quantitative, since as some of you may have heard through the grapevine, the EDD program is going to be kind of maybe moving in that direction where we can really have a more mixed methods approach. We can kind of get the expertise from both areas of data visualization. So we're really excited to be embarking on that journey together tonight. Before we dive into our presenter introductions here, just a quick review of who our executive board team is. Again, my name is Taylor Cello. I'm the president, and I'm an integrative studies concentration here in the EDD program. Also, tonight we have Jennifer Miller, who is our Vice President Resource Queen. You will see her in the chat, giving you all the good things and all things just Sarah to help you with your success. We also have Randall Irving Jr., who is our treasurer. He just joined the call. Perfect timing, Randall. It's great to have you here. He's coming at us live from the West Coast, and we're really excited to have him here tonight. And we also have, as part of our executive board, Chung, who's our communications director, also on the West Coast. So thank you for joining us tonight, Chung. Any social media promos that you've seen, that is a big shout out to him and his creativity on that end. So really appreciate all the work he does. And those who might be joining us a little bit later tonight, but are still awesome resources to have on your side in the EDD program, are Alyssa Thomas, who's our fearless secretary. So any newer members, you may have seen her at our recent new member orientation, in your email inboxes. She is wonderful and keeps us very organized. And we also have Chris Vo, who, if any of you are engaged with our mentorship program, he is your go-to guy for that. So also, quick plug, we are looking for mentors. So if you are in the IRB approval phase or later on, we would love to have you be a part of that. So if you have any questions on how you can mentor someone in the EDD program, and in Jasara specifically, definitely contact Chris Vo. And without further ado, I'm so excited to showcase our two presenters tonight that will again be showing us all about the best practices for data visualization here. And so we are lucky to have Dr. Kari Thierer. So Dr. Kari Thierer is an assistant teaching professor at the Graduate School of Education. Her areas of expertise include student-centered learning, career and technical education, supporting neurodivergent learners, and authentic assessment. Dr. Thierer has over 30 years of experience providing technical assistance and supporting research and evaluation efforts in schools, districts, state and federal education agencies, and nonprofit education organizations throughout the United States. She has led two national education nonprofits sorry about that, y'all, providing student-centered learning and educator support, and has the unique background of supporting educators from preschool through college. Dr. Thierer joined Northeastern in 2022, teaching in the Master's of Education and Doctoral Education programs, and advises dissertation candidates. She has published articles and book chapters related to her work in research. So welcome, Dr. Thierer. That is an impressive resume. Excellent. So then diving into the quantitative side of things, we will have Dr. Michael Dean also presenting with us tonight. Dr. Mike Dean is an associate teaching professor at the Graduate School of Education. He specializes in quantitative methods and evaluation and is particularly interested in how we measure non-traditional academic outcomes. Previously, Mike served as a technical research advisor at the International Rescue Committee, a global humanitarian aid, relief, and development non-governmental organization, and as the head of research at the International Baccalaureate, a nonprofit educational foundation offering international education programs to more than 1 million students worldwide. Additionally, Mike has served as an adjunct professor of statistics at Teachers College Columbia University since 2006. He has 20 plus years of experience as a teacher at the middle school, high school, and graduate levels in the US and Cameroon, and he joined Northeastern as a full-time faculty member in 2015. My goodness, So much great knowledge is going to be spread with us tonight. So, a virtual round of applause for our our two presenters here. We're really lucky to have them tonight, especially in the evening time here on the East Coast. So, we really, really appreciate you both being here. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing for a moment to let Dr. Kari Thierer take the lead here as our co-host in a way here. And feel free to share your screen, Dr. Thierer, if you have anything to share with us visually.
I will. I always use a PowerPoint just because it keeps me on task. So hopefully, can you all see that? Yes, okay. So thanks for the nice introduction and thanks for letting us be here today. Mike and I have been chatting about what we wanted to share because he does qualitative stuff too. So I don't do as much quantitative, but he does a lot of qualitative as well as a dissertation advisor. So let's talk about data visualization. If I get my slides to work, yeah. So a lot of what I want to talk about is like, what's the purpose of it, right? So visualization is an active interpretation and transparency, and you use different data structures for different purposes. And so Mike's going to talk about some of the quantitative ones, and you're going to notice there's a lot of overlap because even in qualitative research, you might do frequency things that look like quantitative. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But this chart just gives a bit of an overview about some of the different visualizations you might use in qualitative research. So you might have things like looking at codes and themes when you start coding your data from cycle 1 and cycle 2, and that's going to represent categories across data. This can look like frequency tables. It says word clouds with caution because sometimes word clouds are fun, but they can be hard to interpret. And so just that's a word of caution. It can be thematic maps. So it's just a visual way to represent kind of the codes and themes that you've come across. You might also use it to visualize processes or sequences. And so change over time, stages or cycles, journey maps, and I'll show you an example of this. Timelines are an example of this, AR cycle diagrams. Um, Visualizations can be relationships. So how do concepts connect or interact? And that might be a conceptual map. You're going to talk about matrices or Venn diagrams. And so you've seen some of these already in some of your research coursework, as well as in probably the readings that you've done. You might talk about participant voice, and this is where frequency might show up. How many times did participants say something? You might look for patterns or different patterns of perspectives. So these could be quote matrices, participant profiles, spectrum diagrams. You could use a visualization for the site or the context to help your reader understand what's happening there. And that could be physical or organizational structure. And so sometimes when you're reading papers, you might see visualizations of a space. That's technically a visualization. You'll see org charts or ecological maps, just trying to figure out how you set descriptions with visual anchors. And you might also see cross-case or multi-participant structures, things like patterns across people or groups. These could be comparison matrices or typology tables. And so all kinds of different visuals will show up in qualitative research. And again, there's going to be some overlap with some quantitative stuff too. But I figure the best way is to look at some of these. I like this one because it's a table, it's a matrix that's talking about different types of data displays across journals. So it's kind of meta for our conversation today. And basically a matrix or a table is going to be, columns and rows telling you things and data. This one happens to be, was from a literature study, and I'll give the references later, but it was a literature review of types of data displays in qualitative research. And so in the study that they did, they looked at a total of 377 uses. 227 were matrices. So it was something like this, because it's a quick and easy way to tell your reader what you know. And that's what a lot of the different data displays are used for, is to help your reader not have to read 3 pages of something that you can tell them in a diagram or in a display. So this one's kind of an easy one to look at, and it's probably one that you're familiar with. This is also a matrix, and this is directly from your Miles and Huberman text. And so if you've taken R2, you'll likely have seen this one before. And again, columns, rows. And if you look at what this data is, and there's a legend, you could write about this, but it would take you a lot longer, and you would probably confuse your your participant or your readers. And so one of the reasons you would choose different visualizations is to make your thinking and your findings transparent without having to overload your reader with a lot of text. This is another one, and this would be back to the chart that I showed you. This is more about your themes and codes. So this looks like a mind map. But in this case, there's also a legend that tells you what each thing is. So these were the themes, these were the sub-themes, and then these are the relationships. Again, super easy visual to show you exactly what it is that you found based on your data collection. And you need to include the understanding of it too. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. This one is fun. It's a journey map. And you don't see a ton of these in a lot of qualitative writing, but I have seen them in different research studies because it talks about, instead of having somebody tell you somebody's experience, you can draw a journey map. And it is a visual of a display. And so if you're doing, you might see this more in like case study research, where you would see, where did they start? What were the different parts of their journey over time? And there's lots of different examples of these, and there's really good articles about journey maps. But it's another easy way to visualize the storytelling you're trying to do. So when we talk about storytelling, this is a good example of that. A journey map is a pretty deep way to tell a story without a lot of words. And so it's another way to think about how you visualize some of your conversations with folks. This is another one from your Miles Huberman and Saldana text, if you've been in R2, and it's called a network map. And again, it's showing connections. And so this one, you can't tell. I mean, you could probably make some assumptions about it, but I like to use it as an example because it gives you the title, but it doesn't explain it. And so you have to try to make some sense of it. And so that's just as another example of that. It tells you some stuff, and it could be a really good thing, but the text that comes before it is likely going to be helpful in making the connections. So if you don't have a legend of some kind, it could be more challenging to try to make sense of what it is. But again, a network model is just showing connections between things. This is one that might show a process. And so you've probably seen different types of these too, but this is an action research process model. And again, sometimes having this in your defenses, like your proposal defense or your final defense, is a good way to explain the process that you went through, your research methodology, particularly for people that may not be familiar with action research. But this is a data visualization in that it's telling the story of your process. And so where a lot of data is talking about your participants, it can also be showing a visual representation of what you did as the researcher, in making it a little bit less reading and more just looking at. How do you choose? And so these are some guiding questions. You got to think about what's the relationship. A lot of people default to matrices because they're easy, and there's nothing wrong with that, because they are. It's a quick and easy way to show information, but you have to think about what it is you're trying to show. Are you looking at frequency? Are you looking at sequence? Are you trying to demonstrate connections? So start there. Don't just start playing with data and just say, I'm choosing this because. Think about who your audience is, what they need to know and what they need to trust. And then make sure that it adds visual interpretive value and it's not just restating what you said in your text. So I'm sure Dr. Dean can talk about this too, probably Dr. Anderson too, where you'll read something and it was pretty clear, and then somebody throws in a table just because they felt like they needed a table or a visualization. Make sure it's adding. If it's not adding, take it out. For two reasons. When you upload to ProQuest, you have to do extra work for every table that you have. So just keep that in mind. But also, it just doesn't help. I've also seen people that will pull some of the data that they've used in previous coursework, and it no longer relates to what they're talking about. They'll just copy and paste from, some of their proposal work over time. And it was a cool table or it was a cool visual at the time, but it doesn't make sense now. And so just make sure that you're really thinking about how does the visual add to your interpretive value. And then Edward Tufte, and I know Mike's going to talk about him too. I love Edward Tufte. If you don't know who this is, great visualization person. But what he talks about too, he's got something called the data ink ratio. So make sure that the visual earns its place. And part of that is like 5 things to think about. Focus on clarity over cleverness. And we just talked about that. Don't make a pretty graphic just cause. It's got to be adding some clarity. It has to be something that's going to bring something. A simple matrix can be better than 5 pages of writing. You want to make sure that it's bringing interpretive integrity. And what that means is your visual is an argument, but be sure that it reflects your analysis, not just your data collection. Unless it's like just a frequency table. But even the choices you make in a table help you think about your analysis. There should be some consistency. Use the same coding conventions, color, shape, labeling throughout your dissertation. Don't just pick random colors that you use repeatedly. It should be accessible. So you're going to think about colorblind safe palettes, sufficient font size, alt text if you're publishing digitally. I can't tell you how many dissertations I've read where there's a really cool matrix, I'm sure. I can't read it though, because the font is so tiny, because they've tried to put too much data in it. And so you have to think about your audience when doing that. And then transparency. So caption every figure with enough context that it can stand alone. And a reader should be able to understand your visual without having to reread all of the paragraphs around it. Now the fun stuff, APA. You do have to pay attention to APA. In APA, there are tables, which are the organized rows and columns, and figures, which is everything else. And so you have to label appropriately. Tables are always numbered sequentially, table 1, table 2, title above in bold italic, note below if needed. Figures are also numbered sequentially, title below in bold, italic, caption below that is in plain text. And all visuals have to be referenced in the text before they appear. And that's something I think a lot of students forget. So you can't just throw in a visual and we don't know what's coming. So make sure that you're telling us what's coming. This is an important piece too, permission and attribution. If you didn't create the figure, you have to have permission before you publish it. I think you have a little wiggle room in dissertations, but just it's something to be mindful of. And then avoid decorative elements that don't serve the data. And again, it might look really cool to have a drop shadow or a 3D effect. It's not going to translate well when you publish. And so just keep that in mind too. And I know Mike's going to talk about some other resources, but AI tools that I've used quite a bit are Claude, and it actually does a pretty good job. And I think Mike's going to show some examples of that. I've also used Napkin AI. And what Napkin AI does is you write text and say, please provide a description of this for me visually. And then it will offer up 20 or 30 different visuals. And so you could play with, okay, what does it look like if this is represented as a ladder? Or what does it look like if this is represented as a circle? And so it'll let you play with it, which I enjoy quite a bit. Further reading, Miles Huberman and Saldana for your qualitative work. They talk about data displays and data a lot and how you're going to do the visualizations. But for fun, check out Edward Tufte. And it's actually Tufte with an E. I spelled that wrong, but he's got some cool stuff. And it's just super interesting. So I'm going to pause there, and I talked a lot, and you guys can ask questions.
Awesome.
I'll even stop my share so you can see me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thierer. Oh my gosh, like that was just gold mine stuff. That was really, really helpful. I saw so many people be like, wow, like this is exactly what I needed. This is what I've been looking for. So thank you so much for imparting that onto us. I love what Jen said. She was like, I feel like I'm shopping now, for all these different options. I love that comment. That's a great way to put it. Um, Before we dive into the quantitative side of things, we did want to let you all know. Shout out to Jen as well for being our engager in the chat. She is grabbing any questions that you're putting in the chat into our home-based documents. That way, at the end of tonight, we'll be able to have Dr. Thierer and Dr. Dean address those questions.
Right.
So feel free to keep them coming in the chat. We'll make a note of it and we'll go down them one by one at the very end. So, because there might be some questions that might even get answered later on too. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. So Thank you. All right, Dr. Dean.
Excellent. Take it away. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for setting the bar high as well. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more on the quant side. And yeah, there we go. All right, so just a couple of notes as you look at this visual. So AI was used in a couple places in this presentation using Claude, and I'll make some comments about that as we go. But what you can see here is that visualizations have come a long way really fast in terms of automation, technology, annotations, um, interactive in nature. And so what you see here is the percent of the population of baby boomers from birth up to 85 plus. And it's going from, I think, around 1960 all the way to 2060, or 1950 rather. And so what you can see here is a lot of information, right? And so, as was pointed out, if your presentation doesn't focus on, for instance, this particular topic, right? This might be too much and take too much time. But if it is a focus, this is something that can convey an amazing amount of information, right? We have a breakdown by gender. We have the years going. We have the population, how it's showing that um, even 4% might seem quite small, but 85 plus of the age of 85 plus would be 4% in 2060. So it's showing you how that is transcending through time, right? And so quite a nice visual. I should say as well that you'll have this presentation and there's links in it to all these things. And there's a few slides at the end that shows visualizations as well. So here's a really cool one. And it's looking at segregation, really. And it's really cool interactive. You can see that we can zoom way in to different parts of New York City. I can find a neighborhood that I lived in at one time, not that long ago, and see the census data. I can zoom way out right into the country, basically, or I can come down here and I can choose different locations like Boston, right? And so I can zoom right into where Northeastern is or anything else you might like to see and see the census breakdown. And so what you can see here with these two um, visualizations is the amount of technology that we now have access to create these types of things. And it's really cool, right? You could spend a lot of time just playing around with something like this. Uh, but it's also been around for a very long time. And you can see the book on the right that was already mentioned. It's a wonderful book. And it's everything from a coffee table book to a first page to last page read. It's absolutely fantastic. And he puts on presentations. He has several books and walks through them. And they don't rely on technology and they don't rely on this is how you do this in this software, but they show you how really the simplicity of visualizations can convey messages and tell stories. And going way back, Florence Nightingale, who's associated with several developments, but data visualization one in the 1800s, right? And this is one from the Crimean War and it conveys mortalities and how they happened. And one of the reasons I put this here is it's credited with changing nursing because during the war, people just assumed people were dying in battles. But she was able to show that people were dying in hospitals and it was preventable. And so think about trying to convey that information in text and maybe the same message doesn't come across and just an incredible step forward for hospitalization and saving lives. So it's a really cool kind of going back a ways when we think of data visualization. So the why. It makes data easier to interpret, speeds up decision making. It can uncover trends and correlations that maybe we didn't see from the raw data. One of the challenges is, especially when we have lots of it, is pulling out what is meaningful in the data, right? Boost audience engagement. And here I'll put a plug for your presentations and your proposal hearings and your defenses. Your dissertation is going to have a lot of words, and we're going to read them all. and your audience is going to read them all. What we don't want to see in a presentation is all of that text again, right? And visualizations, everything from your process to how you conducted your research, right through all the way to your action step activities. Visualize them and talk to it, because that's what we want to hear in these presentations. We want to hear your expertise and you talking to what happened. We don't want to read the slides. So the how, right? We go from data collection to analysis, into the key point of visualizations is the communication. That's what we want to do, right? We want to communicate the results in a meaningful way that say something important, but make the data come alive for the audience. So some common chart types, bar charts, line charts. So bar charts usually are to compare categories. Line charts show us trends, sometimes over time, but in other ways as well. Pie charts divide things up into proportions and percentages, right? And histograms are a little bit different than bar charts. And in the longer presentation that I'll share, there's a few extra slides that go into some more details. But here we're usually talking about a range of a continuous variable, whereas in bar charts, we're comparing categories. Scatterplot is a fantastic way to show relationships between variables, as is a heat map. They are slightly different. Heat maps tend to talk about intensity and whatnot, but both are really good ways at looking at relationships among variables. And so here we'll go through all of these, but there's some key differences in when you use them, what it shows. And so if we look at the bar on the histogram, we can see it's categorical versus continuous type data. We're looking at distributions versus comparisons of categories. We're talking about named groups, right, instead of ranges. So when you think about that, school A doesn't really overlap with school B or C, right? There's no overlap between the two of them. And so let's jump into an example. So this is a survey. And so I chose a survey because that's probably one of the most common uses in AR of a quantitative method. And this is the general self-efficacy measure from 1995. You can see the items on the left. And so if my focus of my dissertation or whatever study is on general self-efficacy, this is the type of table that I might put in the body of the text. However, this is also a great appendix, right? If this is just part of the study and not the focus, you may have several instruments. In this study, this is an actual study we did at Northeastern from an NSF grant that looked at the implementation of a school program to build STEM self-efficacy. So we had several different measures, and this was one of them. And so I would put this in the appendix, and then I would reference some of the questions that I thought brought out an important finding from the study, right? So I might choose a couple of questions. But this type of table provides an amazing amount of information. And Likert scales are sometimes debated whether or not what type of variable they are in the scale level. So it's good to put things like means and medians because they convey several different pieces of information, right? And you can see that we have a pre and a post here, and we have the percentages, right? So there's a lot of information here. So if a reader wanted to dig deeper, they could. But let's break it down into a little bit more specific example. So here we have a particular question. I can remain calm when facing difficulties because I can rely on my coping abilities. Pretty high cognitive load question, but we don't have to get into that here. And so here you can see a vertical and horizontal bar chart, right? And one of the things I'll mention is that it is, I would say, better to move from negative to positive when you go left to right or up to down. And the reason for that is that that's the way the number line essentially moves, right? And so even in survey construction, we want to start with something like strongly disagree and move to strongly agree. And it just helps with the interpretation as we're moving left to right. But you can see here, both of these work pretty well, right? And I would say either one is fine. It can actually just be a choice which one you like looks better, but it essentially conveys the same amount of information, right? So let's look at a pre-post example. And I took some artistic liberty here and I multiplied the n by 4 so that we can look at some differences that we might see. So here we have pre and post. And you do often see larger response rates in the pre to the post. So keep that in mind if you're doing a pre-post, which is common in action research, right? You want to capture something before an intervention and after, or your action step. But let's take a look at this. And so what you have are two bar charts here. Same data, and the charts were made directly from the data, but they look quite different and they convey different pieces of information. And this is where whether we use the raw data, the N, or the percentage makes a big difference. And why is that? Because the N's are so different. And so here is an argument where you'd have to make a choice where I would argue the percentage is probably more revealing because the red bars on the left with raw N is being overwhelmed simply by the number of responses. And so that's if what you're trying to show is that, then for sure, but that's probably not what you want to show, right? What you probably want to convey is the change from pre to post in how people responded. And there we can see it much better on the right. All right, so just quickly, I don't want to get to questions, so I'll show you a little bit about using Claude, but for software, visualizations have become embedded in most software, so it often depends on the organization you are working with that has licenses, etc., right? So Excel is quite good, Tableau, Power BI, Data Wrapper is a new one that's quite good. But statistical software now has it embedded, and it's quite powerful. It was mentioned that we'll have a quant course going forward, and we'll be using SPSS there, and we can do some visualizations directly in there. Then you should also note survey software has visualizations built in as well. All students and faculty have free access to Qualtrics, and I've used a lot of survey software, and Qualtrics is probably the best. And it's free to students. So be aware of that. And built right into your data collection are visualizations. So you can create visualizations right there. AI tips, some of these have been mentioned, but it doesn't replace expertise. You're the experts that you're going to bring, right? And so be precise in your prompting. Ask for refinement, ask for options, ask for critique, right? And you can ask all of these things and prompt in a way that you start to narrow down to what you're really trying to communicate. And that's really what we're trying to do in the end, right? And so here's a visual I made in Claude, same scale. And I threw it all in and I said, let's do some visualizations, right? And so that's not a good way to start. And I'll show you why. If we go here, right? So let's make some data visuals. All right, and so when we do this, and I need to hide all of you for a second. It comes out looking quite nice, colorful, well organized. It has a lot of information. It is interactive, which is quite nice. When you start, and let's start with the first one it created, you start looking at it and start trying to interpret it. And in doing so, I start to get a little bit confused. And one of the reasons I start to get confused is the scale across the top, right? And so the scale across the top has a zero. Doesn't seem to be a natural zero because we move left and increase as well as moving right. And when we start to look at some areas, for instance, 51%, but my green is moving all the way over to 75%. So I'm starting to wonder what's going on. And if I spend a lot of time with it, I can probably figure it out, right? But what's throwing it off after spending a bit of time with this is this percentage up top. And the number line threw me off right away. So what we ask then is, let's not use something like these percentages. Let's actually use the Likert scale that we asked for, right? And when we do that, it starts to make quite a bit more sense. And just a simple change of this allows us now to make a lot more sense of it. Because that's our natural Likert scale. This was a 7-point, pretty large range in the Likert scale. But now it starts to make a lot more sense. And we can see, and we can still have our percentages in here and same information, but visually it makes a lot more sense, at least to me. So that's just a really quick example. Let me show you one other where we were a lot more specific with our prompts, which is the way you want to go about it. So when I was creating some of these visualizations, I used Claude in particular to create those different types of charts, right? So we start off with some pretty cool examples, right? And we can see different ones, all pretty cool. But now I want to start to refine it. And this is where the prompts come in. And this was where the expertise comes in that you bring to this, right? And so let's start, for instance, creating a slide that is all of them put on one slide, right? Which is quite nice for a presentation. Let's ask it to have the colors with the little school spirit that goes along with the rest of the presentation, and then starting to narrow the information that's contained, right? And so let's talk about the bar charts and histograms. And I've put this in the longer presentation for you. That breaks down the different key differences between the two. And then prompting further, let's put the bar chart and histogram next to each other and discuss it. But let's also get those key differences, right? And so the prompting is really important, and bringing your expertise and guiding this is really important. And also, I will admit that the amount of time saved doing this, because I've done a lot of data visualizations over a long period of time. The technology has gotten a lot better. It is quite a tool. And I think we probably all have critiques of AI. I certainly do. But it can save quite a bit of time and really help you refine what you're trying to communicate to your audience. So I have some fun links for data visualization, as well as some useful resources, including the library here at Northeastern has an entire data visual service for you, which is great. But there's some others here as well that I use and that I think are quite helpful. So my contact information is there, but you have that as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. My goodness. We are so grateful to have two experts here in our virtual room tonight, going over the qualitative, the quantitative. And oh, those visuals were so appealing. Like I was like, I don't know, I was like zoomed in, like I was like looking right into my laptop screen. That was just awesome. Really pulled me in. So I can only imagine what it does for other audiences too. So fantastic. I love it. So, without further ado, this is your time to, for any of our attendees to ask any of those questions that you have. I do know that we did start collecting some from the chat, so we'll kind of get started with those for now. And then, if time permits, we can certainly have people unmute and ask some more. So, one question that was in our chat was, what are the tools you can use through Northeastern to apply visuals, and what are your favorite ones? So, I'm assuming with this question, I think they ask like as a student, what do we have like the best access to or free access to, if either of you know?
Well, I think Mike talked about a couple of those. So Claude, for sure, you have access to. Qualtrics, it sounds like. I don't know what other specific ones. Excel, because we were Microsoft, so you have that.
I think SPSS as well, if I'm not mistaken, that was mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. In any type of, if you're dealing with on the quant side, any type of quantitative software now has it built in, everything from R to SAS to SPSS. The first link that is on that resources page takes you to a list of all of those. So it has all of the different tools that you can use for visualizations and also services that Northeastern would provide you to help you do that, essentially.
Nice.
I think as well, I think we have access to NVivo, and NVivo will for coding, and that will do some visualizations for you as well. Then there's so many open source as well, right, that are available out there.
Excellent. Thank you. And just as a reminder to all of you too, Lindley Hummel is our resident expert from the library, especially for those of us in the EDD program. So you can set up appointments with her in light of what you've learned tonight to learn more about how to access these through the library. And I'm sure she could probably direct you to even more. So in fact, kind of quick plug, we are going to be doing a spring event here at Jacera all about how your student access can give you a lot of resources, including those at the library. So this is actually kind of a nice jumping off point to that. So a little sneak preview of what we're going to be presenting on in the spring. So thank you for that question. The next question we have is, what is the extra work in ProQuest required for visuals?
It's mostly, I mean, they've changed it a little bit. It's mostly that you have to make sure everything's labeled appropriately, right? It used to be back in the day, you had to upload all your figures and tables separately. But now that as long as you have them embedded, it's fine. You just are responsible for formatting. So they don't edit anything. So if you put it in there wrong, it gets published wrong. And so it's important to pay attention to APA and make sure that you're labeling everything correctly, that it's readable, all of those things, and it's embedded correctly.
Yeah, really good points. As is a lot of things. It's a lot easier now than when you had to upload pictures of things in different formats. But journal articles also do have different requirements. So journals have different requirements for formatting, as well as how one uploads visuals as compared to text and where they go and whatnot. So just keep an eye on that.
Awesome. And I know someone else had mentioned in the chat too that as a Northeastern student, we do have access to LinkedIn Learning. And there's probably a lot of really awesome and free, and if it's free, it's for me, professional development opportunities through that access. So, especially when it comes to navigating the softwares that I mentioned tonight, understanding the qualitative and quantitative side of things. So, definitely also take advantage of that. So, thank you for those who mentioned that in our chat tonight. Any other questions that are lingering on your minds about the quantitative or qualitative side of data visualization? Feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat for us. All right, so thanks, Jen. What are some books, texts, authors that you would have loved to have as a student when you were learning how to do this work? Great question.
Mike, you should go first.
Tufte is the classic, great, just fantastic book. All of the books, absolutely fantastic. That's one that I came to after after I'd finished school, came across it. So I would certainly say that on the quant side, data visualizations are part of most texts, as long as you're not going into the theoretical mathematical texts. So you'll find it in data literacy. Ben Jones does a good job in data literacy. The book we've chosen for the quant course, I have it over here. Ravid is does it as well, because a good part of quantitative data analysis deals with large amounts of data and their numbers, right? And so, whereas you can offer quotes in qualitative research as evidence and whatnot, but it's very hard to just stick a raw piece of data, a random number into some type of writing. So, data visualizations are very, very common in various statistics books. And so, I think that, and then now, of course, there are books that, depending on the software you're using, and they're usually available online, but that walk along with the software you're using in order to do that, which is very helpful.
And I would just add Johnny Saldana is one of my favorite qualitative guys ever in the whole world. And so he does a lot around data visualization. So you can find a lot of his lectures for free on YouTube. And so that's another place to look. But the Miles Huberman and Saldana book that you have, that's a required text, is a good one. Tufte, I would say too, just because it's cool. Like if you're into data visualization, it's just the stuff that is in those texts will kind of blow your mind. So yeah, I think those ones would be the ones I would add.
Excellent. And thank you, Jen and Chris, for giving us some direct links to some of those that were referenced. Amazing. We do have a home-based document that we did throw in the chat a couple of times, and we're happy to provide those links in there. You can download a copy of that home-based document for your own, devices as well. And Dr. Dean and Dr. Thierer, would you be open to sharing those slides with us to share with our community?
Yes.
Yes, of
Amazing.
course.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Fantastic. So we'll be sure to link those in there as well, for everyone who is here tonight and those who are watching as well. Any other questions before we wrap up tonight? Either unmute or throw them in the chat. Oh, Jen, yes.
So just to kind of echo a couple of questions that I've already asked, sometimes data visualization, speaking especially for myself as a dominant English teacher, can sometimes be a little bit anxiety producing. So given all the resources that you've shared today, all of the content, which is amazing, and examples, where would you recommend somebody like me start? Especially if we want to be a quant person, but we don't have the math prowess, right? And or if you wanted to be a qualitative person, but you're not really a qualitative person, you're more of a quant person. So if there is a dichotomy, or maybe you're both, but where would you start as a recommendation?
I mean, I think for the qualitative side, um, it's really thinking about what is it you're trying to show, right? And so there in the PowerPoint I'll share, there's a journal article, and there's several of them that have been published around data visualizations and qualitative studies. And so just looking at those and seeing what other people are doing, looking at people that are publishing in your field, in your area of content, how are they representing data? So I think all of that is a way to kind of see what's available. And don't limit yourself, right? And so I share the journey map on purpose because it's not one you see a lot in research, but it tells a really cool story. And so I think there are ways to use data visualization to tell your story, even if you don't feel like you are a data person or you're not, you haven't owned that in that same way. But I have friends that have done dissertations that were 100% visual, like they coded with visuals. They drew pictures instead of using in vivo or text. And so be open to some of those other things, but look at other different journal articles and things too. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I echo all of that. I would also say if I were facing that question, I would get online and I'd start looking around
Yeah.
and asking questions, right? University of Syracuse on the quant side, it's one of the links in the presentation. It has an entire, I don't know if you call it office or what, dedicated to it, right? Organizations. Northeastern has degrees in data visualizations. Again, a lot of times it's in analytics and quant. But doing that search because that'll start pointing you in the right direction before you go out and buy a book that you might not, right? Might not be that helpful to you. So do some research first and do it online, and you'll probably find some really good stuff. And a lot of times you'll end up finding things that you can read online, right? And that you have access to freely.
Thank you so much. Appreciate those answers. And I believe it's Heather Leonardo, correct? It looks like you have your hand raised.
I forgot I raised it. Yeah, so actually thinking about what Dr. Thierer was talking about in making sure that there's a point to your graphics. I'm currently in my dissertation editing phase, and I definitely am guilty of adding charts just because I felt like I was supposed to have charts. But watching Professor Dean show off Claude, it made me wonder, is it feasible to take like a finished dissertation and stick it into Claude and be like, yo, where's a good spot for a graphic and what do you suggest here? Or do you think we're going to get some of that nonsense that's like sticking a graphic in because we feel like a graphic should be in it?
So speaking as your chair, first, don't just stick in graphics just because. I mean, really think about how can data tell your story. If you feel like there's a place in your dissertation or in any of your writing that you're just kind of talking and it still feels like you're a little stuck, put that chunk into Claude and say, is there a way for me to visualize this and tell this story better? Because I think that's part of the challenge. When you're doing your dissertations, because you have two cycles, right? You're trying to tell a story over time. And a visual might help that. I mean, you could use a visualization to say, can you please help me tell the story of the different participants that participated in cycle 1 and cycle 2? Can you show me the relationship between the themes that came out of finding my cycle 1 findings and my cycle 2 themes? But don't just put a whole thing in there in Claude, because Claude will hallucinate and just start making stuff up. It doesn't know. That's the human element, right? You're the human that has to decide where do my readers need some support in what I'm writing. That would be my advice. What do you think,
Thanks.
Mike?
Yes, I would even say it strongly. Don't throw it in and ask it for anything like I showed it the first time, and for a reason, right? You're the expert guiding it. And think about telling that story, right? We focused on, for the most part, turning data into visuals, but processes, right? You can consider that data. Telling that story is really important. And think about someone reading an action research study who hasn't studied action research. They reading about it does so much. We ask you to do a graphical representation, I believe at the end of R1, but certainly in the beginning of R2 as well, of your action research study, right? And the point is to try to use that to convey what you did, and it can be a really, really important tool. So yes, don't just throw it in, but guide it.
Great, great wisdom here. Thank you so much. And I was going to say too, there's so much value in asking other students in your cohort, in your program for feedback as well, even if they might not be from the same professional context or research setting that your dissertation, your DIP, it's situated in, because if someone else outside of it can understand the story you're telling, then there you have it. So use people here at Jasera, and feel free to, use those people nearby you for feedback too. And Claude is also another great way to kind of do another feedback loop too. Excellent. Philippa, thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I went to Innovate. US has been having these like free AI workshops, and one of them was on visualizing data, and it was by someone from, I think they were from Pew, and they were talking about visualizing data for news. And one of the things that they did is they would circle in red some of the places where they wanted people to look, and then they would have a headline and then like a sub headline. Is that something that is just for news? Like, should we not be circling things, or is that okay to do? I'm not really sure, like just writing genre, if that's okay or not.
I would say it goes back to what you're trying to accomplish, right? And so if this is in a presentation, it often helps to get someone to look at the slide and not tell them anything and ask them what they see and what draws their eye and what you're trying to communicate. And so, you can do it boldly by circling it in red or animations that circle things and move the eye around the visualization. But you really want to focus on what you want them to see. And so sometimes those animations really help to walk through a story. Other times it just confuses people, right? And so um, it's one thing to throw up a great visualization. You have to talk to it if it's the presentation, right? And walk them through it. So think about what you're going to be saying about it and how it appears. And so it really goes back to what you're trying to communicate in. And so yes, to directly answer your question, it could be okay to do that, but it does go back to what you're trying to communicate.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Wonderful. Any other questions that we have for our experts here tonight? All right. And we'll definitely and certainly, provide their contact information in our home base document in case you do have any follow-ups. Any words of wisdom you wished you knew? Jen has that closing question. Anything that has been mentioned that you would impart to all of us here, whether we are earlier in the program, dissertation phase, data visualization, otherwise.
I mean, I think it's different for us because we're not in the program. I mean,
True.
like, I wish that I had Claude when I was doing some of my initial writing. That would have been helpful. So I would say, make sure you're utilizing all those resources that Mike mentioned, all of the things you have access to.
I'll say the opposite. I'm glad I didn't have Claude when I did mine. But yes, it's a great resource. I wouldn't have put it here. So maybe unrelated to this, what you're doing is challenging and difficult, and it's supposed to be. It's a doctorate. But one of the things I would have liked to remind myself is that it's a lot of fun as well. And you're learning something at a level of depth that you may not ever get to do again. So remind yourselves that that's pretty cool, and it's also fun, even though it seems like a lot of hard work.
And I'll just piggyback on that too, because I do think that you forget the fun sometimes and you're passionate about it. And I do think data visualization could be a way to play with that, right? You could play with some really cool ways to think about things. And so, that's where Claude could be really beneficial too. Take your findings and say, how might I create a really fun visual that shows some of these things? So it could be fun. But that's great advice, Mike.
Love it. Yeah, leading with your interests, leading with creativity definitely makes it more fun and enjoyable. Fantastic. So, quick wrap up here before we all go today. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Can everyone see this event slide? Amazing. So we're wrapping up the winter quarter. So we do have one last event that we always put on every month, and that is that final push to the end of the quarter through our power hour. It is our time to not only build community, but also to get our tasks done together. So we're talking final projects, discussion boards, data visualization practice, perhaps. This is a great time to apply what we learned tonight. So whatever that looks like, join us. And it will be March 25th, 2026. 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. for those of you on the Pacific Coast time. And it will be remote, and we will be sending out, reminder emails, Zoom links, etc. But if you want to grab this meeting ID now is your opportunity.